and help welcome our honored, distinguished guest, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Thank you very kindly. Principal Fornese, Mr. Williams, members of the faculty and members of the student body of Barrett Junior High School, ladies and gentlemen. I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here today and to have the opportunity of taking a brief break in a pretty busy schedule in the city of Philadelphia to share with you the students of Barrett Junior High School. And I want to express my personal appreciation to the principal and the administration for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to see this very fine and enthusiastic group of students here at Barrett. I guess I ought to start out with a commercial, and that is tonight we're going to have a great night in the city of Philadelphia at the Spectrum. Now, I know you've heard of that new impressive structure called the Spectrum. And I know you've heard of Harry Belafonte and Aretha Franklin and Nipsey Russell and Sidney Poitier and all of these other great and outstanding artists. Well, they're going to be here tonight at the Spectrum. And I hope that each of you will go home and tell your parents to be there tonight for this great Freedom Festival. And I hope you will come also, for it will be a great experience. And by coming, you will be supporting the work of the civil rights movement. Now that I've gotten the commercial out of the way, I'll move on and say some things that I want to say very briefly. And I'm being very honest, I'm going to be brief because I have other engagements. I don't have a tradition of being brief all the time. You know, I'm a Baptist preacher, and we can talk a long time. But I'm going to really be brief today. I want to ask you a question, and that is, what is in your life's blueprint? This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go. And whenever a building is constructed, you usually have an architect who draws a blueprint. And that blueprint serves as the pattern, as the guide, as the model for those who are to build the building. And a building is not well erected without a good, sound, and solid blueprint. Now, each of you is in the process of building the structure of your lives. And the question is whether you have a proper, a solid, and a sound blueprint. And I want to suggest some of the things that should be in your life's blueprint. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth. And always feel that your life has ultimate significance. Now that means that you should not be ashamed of your color. You know, it's very unfortunate that in so many instances our society has placed a stigma on the Negro's color. And you know, there are some Negroes who are ashamed of themselves. But don't be ashamed of your color. Don't be ashamed of your biological features. Somehow you must be able to say in your own lives and really believe it, I am black but beautiful. And believe it in your heart. And therefore, you need not be lured into purchasing cosmetics advertised to make you lighter. Neither do you need to process your hair to make it appear straight. I have good hair, and it is as good as anybody else's hair in the world, and we've got to believe that. Now, in your life's blueprint, be sure that you have that a principle of somebodyness. Secondly, in your life's blueprint, you must have as a basic principle the determination to achieve excellence in your various fields of endeavor. You're going to be deciding as the days and the years unfold what you will do in life, what your life's work will be. And once you discover what it will be, set out to do it and to do it well. And I say to you, my young friends, that doors are opening to each of you. Doors of opportunity are opening to each of you that were not open to your mothers and to your fathers. And the great challenge facing you is to be ready to enter these doors as they open. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great essayist, said in a lecture back in 1871 that if a man can write a better book or preach a better sermon or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, even if he builds his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten path to his door. That hadn't always been true, but it will become increasingly true. And so I would urge you to study hard, to burn the midnight oil. I would say to you, don't drop out of school, and I understand all of the sociological reasons why we often drop out of school. But I urge you, in spite of your economic plight, in spite of the situation that you are forced to live so often with intolerable conditions, stay in school. And when you discover what you're going to be in life, set out to do it as if God Almighty called you at this particular moment in history to do it. And just don't set out to do a good Negro job, but do a good job that anybody could do. Don't set out to be just a good Negro doctor, a good Negro lawyer, a good Negro school teacher, a good Negro preacher, a good Negro barber, a beautician, a good Negro skilled laborer. For if you set out to do that, you have already flunked your matriculation exam for entrance into the University of Integration. Set out to do a good job and do that job so well that the living, the dead, or the unborn couldn't do it any better. If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Leontine Price sings before the Metropolitan Opera. And sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well. If you can't be a pine on the top of the hill, be a scrub in the valley. But be the best little scrub on the side of the rill. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. Be the best of whatever you are. We already have some noble examples of black men and black women who demonstrated to us that human nature cannot be cataloged. They in their own lives have walked through long and desolate nights of oppression, and yet they've risen up and plunged against cloud-filled nights of affliction, new and blazing stars of inspiration. And so from an old slave cabin of Virginia's hills, Booker T. Washington rose up to be one of America's great leaders. He lit a torch in Alabama, and darkness fled in that setting. Yes, you should know this because it's in your own city. From a poverty-stricken area of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Marion Anderson rose up to be the world's greatest contralto, so that a Toscanini could say that a voice like this comes only once in a century. And Sibelius of Finland could say, my roof is too low for such a voice, from the red hills of Gordon County, Georgia. And the arms of a mother who could neither read nor write, Roland Hayes rose up to be one of the world's great singers and carried his melodious voice into the palaces and mansions of kings and queens. From crippling circumstances, there came a George Washington Carver to carve for himself an imperishable niche in the annals of science. There was a star in the diplomatic sky, and then came Ralph Bunce, the grandson of a slave preacher, and he reached up and grabbed it and allowed it to shine in his life with all of its scintillating beauty. There was a star in the athletic sky. And then came Jackie Robinson in his day and Willie Mays in his day with their powerful bats and their calm spirits. Then came Jesse Owens with his fleet and dashing feet. Then came Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali with their educated fists. All of them came to tell us that we can be somebody, and to justify the conviction of the poet, fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same. And if I were so tall as to reach the pole, or to grasp the ocean at a span, I must be measured by my soul. The mind is the standard of the man. And finally, in your life's blueprint must be a commitment to the eternal principles of beauty, love, and justice. Don't allow anybody to pull you so low as to make you hate them. Don't allow anybody to cause you to lose your self-respect to the point that you do not struggle for justice. However young you are, you have a responsibility to seek to make your nation a better nation in which to live. You have a responsibility to seek to make life better for everybody. And so you must be involved in the struggle for freedom and justice. Now, in this struggle for freedom and justice, there are many constructive things that we all can do and that we all must do. And we must not give ourselves to those things which will not solve our problems. You've heard the word nonviolent and you've heard the word violent. I happen to believe in nonviolence. We struggle with this method with young people and adults alike all over the South, and we have won some significant victories, and we've got to struggle with it all over the North because the problems are as serious in the North as they are in the South. But I believe as we struggle with these problems, we've got to struggle with them with a method that can be militant, but at the same time does not destroy life or property. And so our slogan must not be burn, baby, burn. It must be build, baby, build. Organize, baby, organize. Yes, our slogan must be learn, baby, learn, so that we can earn, baby, earn. And with a powerful commitment, I believe that we can transform dark yesterdays of injustice into bright tomorrows of justice and humanity. Let us keep going toward the goal of selfhood, toward the realization of the dream of brotherhood, and toward the realization of the dream of understanding goodwill. Let nobody stop us. I close by quoting once more the man that the young lady quoted, that magnificent black bard who has now passed on, Langston Hughes. One day he wrote a poem entitled Mother to Son. The mother didn't always have her grammar right, but she uttered words of great symbolic profundity. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stad. It's had tacks in it, boards torn up, places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I's been a-climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you stop now. Don't you sit down on the steps 'cause you find this kind of hard. But I's still going, boy. I's still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Well, life for none of us has been a crystal stair, but we must keep moving. We must keep going. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl, but by all means, keep moving.
On April 4th, 1968, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death on a hotel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. His death literally changed the world. We begin our coverage with a look back at Dr. King's legacy and why 50 years later, it's still a work in progress. 3 generations retrace the steps of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this week on U.S. Highway 61. It was here in Memphis that the civil rights leader delivered his 1968 mountaintop speech.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
He arrived in Memphis in early April that year to support the striking sanitation workers amidst planning what was to be a massive presence in the nation's capital, the so-called Poor People's Campaign. But he was assassinated by James Earl Ray on April 4th. What followed instead was a reckoning. The riots after the King assassination, also known as the Holy Week Uprising, represented the greatest wave of social unrest the United States had experienced since the Civil War.
There is a legitimate gripe.
In the years preceding his death, the Baptist minister used his well-known tactics of nonviolence and civil disobedience. King led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, and in 1962, as the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, launched an unsuccessful campaign against segregation in Albany, Georgia. He helped organize the nonviolent 1963 protests in Birmingham, Alabama.
We must make the pledge that we shall all...
Then came the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
In 1965, he helped to organize the Selma to Montgomery marches and took the movement to Chicago to work on segregated housing. In his final years, he expanded his focus to include opposition to poverty and the Vietnam War.
I accept this award.
As this happened, King's popularity began to wane after he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. He began to lose momentum as he moved attention from civil rights in the South to tackling segregation and poverty in the North. A 1966 Gallup poll found nearly 7 in 10 Americans viewed King unfavorably. Today, people honored King's sacrifice at the memorial dedicated to him in Washington, hoping to connect his message to today's struggles. Around the country, there are all sorts of reminders of his work, and hundreds of streets in the U.S. have been renamed in his honor.
It came as a joyous daybreak.
And children everywhere read and reenact King's "I Have a Dream" speech every MLK Day, a federal holiday by a vote of Congress and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1983.
Now is the time to make real promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice.
But it's the deeds, the actual living out of his legacy, that 9-year-old Yolanda King addressed at the recent March for Our Lives gun control rally in Washington. the granddaughter of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, had a call to action of her own.
My grandfather had a dream that his 4 little children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that enough is enough. And that this should be a gun-free world, period.
Yet, King's dreams are still largely unfulfilled. According to a new Associated Press poll, just over half of all Americans, including 79% of blacks and 44% of whites, said African Americans continue to face disadvantages to getting ahead. This week's events were intended to try to bear witness to the words of Martin Luther King and maybe help fulfill more of his vision. King himself laid out in a 1968 sermon, which came to be known as the drum major instinct, how he would like to be remembered. He spoke then at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta.
Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind.
The Freedom Ride of 1965 was a significant event in the history of civil rights for all Australians. Inspired by the Freedom Riders of the American Civil Rights Movement, students from the University of Sydney, led by the legendary Charles Perkins, embarked on a journey through Western New South Wales to expose racism and segregation. 50 years on, the bus has headed west again to honour the legacy of the Freedom Rides. Danny Teese-Johnson reports.
It was 50 years ago today here in the lawns of Sydney University when 29 students jumped on the bus with Charlie Perkins, the famous Aboriginal leader and activist. They embarked on a journey through Western New South Wales to show the rest of the world the apartheid and the racism that existed. What they didn't know is that they would create the Freedom Rides, the bus ride that changed the nation. They stood on the lawns of Sydney University waiting to board the bus like they did 50 years before. But it was at a meeting in 1964 where the Freedom Rides began. A group of politically minded students were protesting about the treatment of African Americans in the United States. They were challenged to look into their own backyard, and they did.
You know, they had a remarkable leader in Charlie Perkins, and they were students who had been very concerned about what was going on in the United States in the civil rights movement, and a lecturer actually said, look, you've got to think about what's going on in our own country and the kind of reconciliation that there needs to be here. And Charlie really was able to motivate and lead those students to doing something about an issue about which they felt passionate.
It was February 12, 1965. 29 non-Indigenous students boarded the bus with Aboriginal leader and rights campaigner Charles Perkins, in what some have described as one of the greatest acts of reconciliation Australia has ever seen. They departed Sydney and headed to northwestern New South Wales on what they called a fact-finding mission to understand the level of racism and segregation. Today, the original Freedom Riders gathered at Sydney University to retrace their historic journey. And just as they did then, they broke into song.
We shall overcome someday.
Very much, and it's very special to be here. I can't possibly fill my father's shoes, of course, but I'm here trying to represent him.
As they toured Western New South Wales in 1965, the students were confronted and shocked by what they saw. Incidents of violence between the students and locals in Walgett and Moree drew international media attention.
We work together. If we do the right things together, we can make anything happen, we can change anything, because even though we, as Aboriginal people, we have a long way to go, we need to ignite the fire of our freedom fighters that are in our towns today, support the people that get up and fight every day, and make sure that those people are recognised every day for the efforts, because a lot of it's done, as you in the early days, with nothing.
While the students could not foresee what they created, the legacy of the Freedom Rides lives on, both in the Aboriginal communities they visited and through the stories that are passed down by those who were touched by the Freedom Rides.
It's not about Sydney University, it's not about the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, never was. It is about the Aboriginal people, the conditions that we, my mum, Nan, your Nan, our mob out there that they've lived in and endured and still live in today. You know, I think we still have a long way to go.
It wasn't until after the journey was completed that the real impact of the Freedom Rides could be felt across the nation. Charlie and the students called it the Safa bus ride, but they didn't realise then that this would be the bus ride that changed the nation. The Freedom Rides were born.
I think the Freedom Ride, for me, personally, reminds me about what you can do and what these people did. Just, you know, you don't think you have that power to change it, but you do.
Danny Teese Johnson, driving the way to freedom for NITV News.
We stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. Ralph Abernathy was still in the room. Jesse Jackson was on the ground. Andy Young was on the ground. He was leaning over the railing. Martin Luther King was leaning over the railing that separated the down from the up. He was talking to Jesse. I said, guys, come on, let's go. We have a rally tonight. I said, okay. I turned to go down the steps. I got 2 or 3 steps, and the shot rang out. Kapow! Hit him in the side of his face, knocked him to the floor, knocked one of his shoes off. I said, I'm having a nightmare. But the nightmare was that it was real. That was the nightmare. Blood was everywhere, gushing from his face. So much blood. I ran in the room to call an ambulance. The operator had left the switchboard, so we couldn't get a phone. So I hollered to the policemen. They were coming from the fire station across the street. Well, I hollered to them, call an ambulance on your police radio. Dr. King has been shot. And the police said, where did the shot come from? So there's a famous pointing picture of us pointing to the building where the shot came from. The ambulance came and took him where I told him to. And we waited. And we waited. And we waited. We waited. Finally, and I don't know how this happened, but finally the word came. We never used the word death. They never said he died. Never said that. Never used. We say we lost him. We lost him. All the places I could have been, all the places he could have been. Why was I there at that moment in time? And God revealed to me why I was there. Crucifixions have to have witnesses. Martin Luther King, all of his abilities, PhD at 28, Nobel Peace Prize at 34, the youngest at that time to get one. Could have been UN ambassador, all the things he could have been. And here he is dying on a cold concrete floor on a cheap motel. And they said, we will shoot this dreamer and see what happens to his dream. And the word comes loud and clear. Yes, unfortunately, you can kill the dreamer. But no, absolutely no. You cannot kill the dream. The dream is still alive.
Said, there's not anything more powerful than the marching feet of a determined people.
As a kid, there was not much I could aspire to. We were diminished in the way we thought we could access power and be part of the American fabric.
And so, with this gigantic march, we were saying to the world, this land of great opportunity, this land of liberty has an asterisk beside it. It is a land of freedom for everybody else except black people.
Prior to Martin Luther King Jr., the United States was like a dysfunctional drug addict or alcoholic. It had become addicted to racial segregation.
At the end of the Second World War, we were under the belief, if we were triumphant over fascism, that the men and women who returned from that conflict would be celebrated and honored.
When I was growing up in rural Alabama and would see those signs that would say, white waiting, colored waiting, white men, colored men, I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, why? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way.
I first knew of Dr. King the way everybody knew of Dr. King. All of a sudden, one day in the midst of this turmoil in some faraway place called Montgomery, Dr. King was pressed into service and took over the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott. We heard of him almost immediately because not only did he accept the leadership, but he pressed this idea that we should do it nonviolently.
I was deeply inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to find a way to get in the way. So I used nonviolence by sitting on a lunch counter stool, by going on a freedom ride to get in the way.
The Freedom Ride was an attempt to break the segregation laws on interstate transportation, on buses and on trains.
There were 6 whites on the Freedom Ride and 7 blacks. We would sit together, black and white. And Rock Hill, South Carolina was where we encountered the first violence, with John Lewis being pretty well beaten up.
The federal government finally intervened, and these early victories only encouraged us that we could do other things.
They were very smart, media-wise, because they dressed up. They put the ties on, they put the jackets on, they were looking good. And they are going up against the authority. They're going against the man. That was tremendously exciting to us as young white Southerners.
As the nonviolent concept grew, parallel to that was also the growth of an eye for an eye, violence. And there were many who were quite bright and quite gifted and honorable men and women who saw violence as an answer that just did not quite sit comfortably with the code that others of us had, saying that although racism was a cruel experience, we could not fight it by becoming racists.
In Birmingham, Alabama, the nation was treated with television images of black and white boys and girls having high-pressure fire hoses, slammed them up against the walls as they were peacefully demonstrating to end segregation. Police dogs biting them. These pictures were circulated all around the world. But those demonstrations were like a spark that ignited a prairie fire of black protests across the country.
And Kennedy, on the one hand, he's trying to win Africans and people and say, we are a better system than communism. And at the same time, there was this harsh treatment of black people that just didn't square in the final equation. And the more we were feisty in our demands of government, the more it revealed the weaknesses in our own construct.
What started out as the black Negro protest had developed into a Negro revolution.
There was a feeling that we would not be able to break the Deep South. So that March on Washington was to be the culmination of all of this intense organizing. It really has to be a moral crusade for the country.
The struggle for freedom in the United States had to move to the center of power, to where the president and the Congress were, that no matter how many demonstrations took place in Montgomery and in Birmingham and in places all around the South, that until you could change the central government, significant things wouldn't happen.
The March on Washington was an accumulation of all this, because here would have been the biggest display of America in its most democratic moment, making a choice, and it was something that was emerging as a great demonstration as to the will of the people.
Well, it may be the last time you march on the Capitol.
If that day erupted into violence, then our cause would be seriously reversed and hard to come by again.
Well, it may be the last time you march for your freedom. Maybe the last time, but I don't know. Singing, this may be the last